Well, of course, when I make this assessment, I say it with the caveat that if the United States and other Western allies provide Ukraine what is needed, then Crimea could be liberated by the end of August. And I'm talking specifically, of course, about long range precision weapons that could make Crimea untenable for the Black Sea Fleet, for the Russian Air Force to deny Crimea as a sanctuary. So that's the critical caveat, is the United States has to provide the long range weapons necessary to help Ukraine do that. I don't see how Ukraine will ever be safe and secure or able to rebuild its economy as long as Russia occupies Crimea. I mean, when anybody that looks at a map can see that Russian forces on Crimea will always be able to block access in and out of Azov Sea. And of course, they'll continue to be able to disrupt anything coming in and out of Odessa or Mykolaiv. So even if all of Donbass was liberated and Russia still controlled Crimea, they would be in position to launch another attack in a couple of years after they were ready and the West lost interest, and they would always be able to block or disrupt commerce for Ukraine. So that's why, to me, I can't imagine a positive outcome if Russia is allowed to keep Crimea. Well, of course, the Russians are going to build trenches. I mean, that's not a surprise. What matters is, number one, who's in those trenches? I mean, who are we talking about? It's the same unlucky, unhappy, poorly led, poorly trained Russian soldiers that are getting slaughtered now around Bakhmut and everywhere else. So just having trenches by itself, of course, that makes it difficult, but that's not decisive. Also, I noticed that almost none of these trenches have overhead cover. And without overhead cover, those soldiers are going to be very vulnerable and exposed. And when you have obstacles like this famous dragon's teeth or mines or whatever, if you don't cover them with artillery and fires, then they're actually not that difficult to overcome. I think that the general staff, the Ukrainian general staff, is very smart. They understand all of this. And so if and when the time comes, and only the general staff knows when that time and when those conditions will be right, I imagine they will do a lot of things that will neutralize the advantages that Russian defenders might have. They will devise this attack in a way that makes the most of all the different assets, what we would call combined arms, tanks and infantry and engineers, artillery, close air support, special forces, all the different things that would give the Ukrainian soldiers the best advantage, the best chance to win when the time comes. If you're a defender in a trench, you have protection. The defender always has some advantages. What I'm saying is that once the Ukrainian General Staff has decided it's time to go, I'm sure that they will have figured out the best ways to neutralize whatever those advantages are. Let's just say there will be much less enthusiasm to keep doing things there in the Donbass region. I mean, I can imagine, I'm not predicting this, but I can imagine a scenario where there's a new government in the Kremlin, and whoever the new leader is will be focused on trying to consolidate power immediately. And I could envision different parts of the Russian Federation seeing an opportunity to leave. I don't know that, but these are the kind of things that the new leadership of the Kremlin will have to worry about. So I don't advocate regime change. That's up to the nations. But I think that if Ukraine keeps focused on the objective, on the decisive part of this war, which is liberation of Crimea, I think there will be a lot of other positive things that will flow from this. I have been surprised at how there's a tendency to underestimate how effective Ukrainian forces can be. I don't understand that. Ukrainian forces have constantly done better than experts have expected. Now, nobody's underestimating the challenge. I mean, this is going to be difficult. Of course, it's going to be difficult. But when I think about how fast Ukrainians have learned how to do things, how to integrate new equipment, when I think about what I've seen over the past 14 months, It's my sense that Ukraine will achieve much more on this attack than maybe what some people think. Now, of course, the only the general staff knows the plan. Even though information was leaked, there was really nothing much about the plan that was leaked, which I think is important. And even if it had come out, I don't think that the Russians are agile enough to be able to adjust and disrupt what Ukraine has planned. So I remain optimistic. Getting capability closer to Crimea that will enable them to hit all the different targets in Crimea with precision, to isolate Crimea, to make it untenable for Russian forces. I think we will see this happening this summer. So I imagine that the Ukrainian General Staff has already identified, what vulnerabilities were exposed. They will have already taken the actions necessary to mitigate the possible damage. But I think that we could find a way to turn this into a positive also. It highlights, for example, the reporting says that there is a shortage of air and missile defense weapons on the Ukrainian side. So hopefully this will spur the government my government to increase delivery of air and missile defense. But also, this is another reason why we have to give Ukraine the ability to deny Crimea as sanctuary, because a lot of these missile attacks against Ukrainian civilians emanate from Crimea, either from the Russian Air Force there, or from drones that are launched from there, or from the Black Sea Fleet that's based in Sevastopol, launches missiles against apartment buildings and other civilian targets. So maybe this will add some urgency to our efforts to provide Ukraine what's needed. Well, of course, I don't know that. I would imagine there would be extreme pressure on the Kremlin if the people around Putin see that this war truly is lost. I think most of them already realize that the war is lost, or that it's been a disaster. But for them to lose Crimea after talking so much about it, that would really create some serious domestic internal problems. Now, clearly Crimea is strategically important for everybody that can read a map. But the average Russian, I don't see Russians running to recruiting centers begging to join the army so they can defend Crimea. You remember last summer when the first time there was a drone strike on the Saki air base in Crimea, and there were thousands of Russian tourists that were there, and they all left as quickly as they possibly could. None of them went to the recruiting office saying, please let me join the army to defend Crimea. So I don't know how emotionally important Crimea is for average Russians as much as it is for Kremlin. Frankly, that doesn't matter. What matters is what's decisive for Ukraine. That's what matters. And I think your president has made it clear that the restoration of all Ukrainian sovereign territory, to include Crimea, has to be the objective.